My name is Isolde, and the night my marriage shattered began with champagne. Not the kind that celebrates love or anniversaries. Not the kind that marks quiet victories between two people who have endured storms together. No, this champagne was the sound of arrogance, poured into crystal glasses that caught the city's neon glow, and scattered it like shards of broken glass across my living room. Damien stood at the center of it all, a man reborn in his own imagination. His voice carried above the hum of the guests he had invited into our home, men in tailored suits, women draped in silk, people who had once ignored him but now clung to his every word as if his success might spill over onto them. They toasted, they cheered, they bowed their heads toward him as though he were a king. Only I knew the cost of that crown. I watched from the corner, my champagne flute untouched in my hand. I remembered the nights when he couldn't afford the rent, when I pawned my grandmother's necklace to cover payroll for his failing company. I remembered every weekend lost to meetings, every vacation we canceled because he said, "One day it will be worth it." I remembered lying awake beside him as he whispered promises of a future built on sacrifice. Our sacrifice. And now the deal had come. The company was sold. His shares cashed out. $62 million. Wealth that could change a life forever. Wealth that should have been ours. But when Damien lifted his glass, he did not look at me. He looked at the crowd. To reinvention, he declared. To shedding the weight of the past and embracing the freedom of the future. The room roared approval. Glasses clinked. Laughter filled the air. And then his eyes found mine, his smile cold, rehearsed. "You've been supportive, Isolde," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, every syllable sharpened for the crowd's amusement. "But let's not kid ourselves. You doubted me. You slowed me down. And now?" He raised his glass higher. "Now I no longer need to carry dead weight." A ripple of gasps moved through the room. Someone laughed nervously, waiting for the punchline. My chest tightened, my throat closed, but Damien's smile only widened. "Don't look so shocked," he went on, his words slicing clean through me. $62 million buys freedom. Freedom from limitations. Freedom from mistakes. Freedom from people who hold me back. As of tonight, I'm done living small. As of tomorrow, Isolde, you will no longer be here. For a moment, the entire room tilted. The sound of laughter, the clink of glass, the city's hum beyond the windows. It all blurred into static. My husband, the man I had built a life beside, the man I had fed when he was broke and dressed when he was desperate, had just announced my erasure as if it were part of his victory speech. The guests shifted uncomfortably, but not one defended me. Some smirked. Some raised their brows in pity. Others whispered into their glasses. I felt the burn rise in my cheeks, humiliation cutting deeper than any blade. I set my untouched champagne down on the table, the stem trembling in my hand. My voice cracked as I asked, barely audible over the crowd, "You're throwing me out?" Damien chuckled, as if I were a child who had asked a silly question. "Don't be dramatic. You'll be taken care of. But we both know this marriage has been over for a long time. Tonight is about beginnings, not endings. I need to move on. You should too." His friends laughed again, emboldened by his dismissal. And in that moment I understood. He wasn't just discarding me. He was erasing me. Years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of partnership, reduced to nothing more than a joke in his victory speech. I left that night with a single bag. Damien didn't stop me. He didn't even lower his glass as I walked out the door. Outside, the city's cold air hit my face like a slap. My chest ached, my vision blurred, but beneath the pain something else stirred. A clarity. A fire. Because humiliation, I realized, is a strange thing. Crushes you, yes. But it also hardens you. It forces you to see not just who someone truly is, but who you are without them. Damien thought $62 million made him untouchable. He thought I would disappear quietly into the night, forgotten, discarded like yesterday's burden. But he was wrong. Within 24 hours, the same man who mocked me, who threw me out with nothing, would come crawling back to my door, begging for the second chance he swore he didn't need. And I would be ready. The next morning, I returned to the apartment only to find my key card already deactivated. The handle beeped red when I tried, mocking me with its refusal. I pressed again, harder, as if force would undo what Damien had done. Nothing. Just a flat tone, final and cold. The concierge glanced up from the desk, avoiding my eyes. "Mrs. Reed," he said carefully. "Mr. Reed left instructions. You're no longer authorized for the building." The words sliced deeper than the icy air outside. My name still clung to the title Mrs. Reed, but already the world was adjusting, reprogramming itself to orbit Damien alone. I stood there frozen until the elevator chimed. Damien stepped out, immaculate in a new tailored suit, a silk tie glinting under the lobby lights. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked amused. "Isolde," he said smoothly, as though greeting a guest rather than his wife. "I thought you'd be gone by now." I swallowed hard. "You changed the locks." "I did," he replied casually. "It's easier this way. Clean breaks are best. No need for messy emotions." My hands curled into fists. "After everything I gave you, my savings, my time, my loyalty, you call it messy emotions?" He sighed as though I bored him. "You invested in me, Isolde, and it paid off. 62 million, if you recall. You should be proud. But the truth is, you were never meant for the life I'm about to live. I've outgrown us." His words landed like stones. I wanted to scream, to claw at his perfect composure, but humiliation burned hotter than rage. I forced my voice steady. "So you're just discarding me? After all these years?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Don't make this harder on yourself. I'll have the lawyers draft a settlement. You'll get something. Enough to start over. That should satisfy you." Enough to start over. As though I were a charity case. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. "And what about love, Damien? What about vows?" His smile widened, cruel. "Love doesn't scale. Money does. And vows," he shrugged. "They expire." The elevator doors opened again, and two of his new associates stepped out. Damien turned to them with a grin, sliding seamlessly back into his performance. "Gentlemen, perfect timing. Shall we discuss the next venture?" I stood there invisible as they clapped him on the back, ignoring me like I was an inconvenience blocking the marble floor. That night, I dragged my suitcase into Julia's apartment, my older sister, the one who had always seen through Damien's charm. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the door, wrapped me in her arms, and let me cry until my body shook with exhaustion. When the tears finally slowed, she pulled back and said quietly, "You're not broken, Isolde. He thinks money makes him invincible. But men like Damien always forget. They're only strong until someone shows the world their cracks." Her words struck deep. Somewhere under the humiliation, a spark flickered. The next day, as I walked through the city, I began noticing details I had ignored for years. Damien's name was everywhere. Business headlines, financial blogs, even whispered on street corners. He was basking in the glow of his victory, feeding on the city's attention like a starving man finally given a feast. But I also knew something he didn't. His wealth wasn't built on pure genius. I had watched him cut corners, exaggerate numbers, spin stories until investors nodded along. I had seen him fudge contracts, charm regulators, dance at the edge of legality. Damien believed he had buried those secrets under $62 million. But I remembered where the bones were hidden. That realization steadied me. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't discarded. I was dangerous if I chose to be. That night, Julia found me at her kitchen table surrounded by scraps of paper, old emails, receipts I had dug out of forgotten folders. My hands moved quickly, scribbling timelines, mapping connections. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You're planning something." I looked up, my eyes burning. "I'm not letting him erase me. If he thinks I'm dead weight, I'll show him just how heavy truth can be." Because Damien's empire might have been minted overnight, but it was built on cracks I could widen. And once I did, his 62 million would turn into chains around his neck. I spent the first 2 nights at Julia's in a haze, replaying Damien's words until they carved wounds across my mind. Dead weight. Expired vows. Enough to start over. Each phrase rang like a gavel, final and cruel. But grief has a rhythm: shock, anger, clarity. By the 3rd night, clarity arrived. I pulled my laptop across Julia's small kitchen table and began digging. The first thing I recovered were old contracts, files Damien had asked me to look over back when his team, consisted only of us two and a rented office with flickering lights. I remembered the nights he shoved papers at me saying, "Just skim this. Investors don't care about the details." Back then I trusted him. Now I read them with new eyes. And I saw what others might have missed. Small inconsistencies, inflated valuations, promises to investors that never matched reality. Damien had built his empire not on solid stone, but on sand held together by charm and half-truths. I began copying everything: contracts, emails, transaction logs. Anything with his name on it I saved to an encrypted drive. Then came the financial records. For years my paycheck had flowed into our joint account. I had covered his shortfalls, paid off silent debts, even funneled my inheritance into keeping his company alive. He had called it our dream. The bank records told the truth. It had been my sacrifice feeding his success. I printed statements, highlighted transfers, matched dates to emails where he promised, "Just one more investment, Isolde, and we'll make it." My hand shook as I laid the papers across Julia's table. My name, my money, my years, all documented proof of how he had bled me dry. But I wasn't only looking for evidence of theft. I was looking for patterns. And I found them. Late-night texts Damien had sent to investors. Messages where he smoothed over missed deadlines with lies. Emails where he exaggerated revenue numbers by adding a zero that didn't exist. My stomach turned as I scrolled through them, the realization pressing in. Damien's empire wasn't just morally rotten. It was legally fragile. And then there were the whispers. Julia had friends in the financial district, and news of Damien's sudden windfall had stirred curiosity. Over coffee, one contact told her, "Deals like his don't close clean. If someone digs, they'll find something." That was all I needed to hear. I didn't have to invent his downfall. I only had to open the curtain. Still, I knew I couldn't do it alone. My knowledge had limits. I understood enough to sense danger but not enough to weaponize it. I needed allies, someone who knew the language of law and contracts the way Damien knew the language of deceit. But before I reached for help, I tested myself. One evening I followed Damien from afar. He exited a downtown hotel, laughing with two investors, his hand heavy on their shoulders. I ducked behind a pillar, my phone trembling in my grip as I snapped photos. The men looked unsettled, their eyes darting, as Damien reassured them with his signature smile. Later that night, I checked the hotel's public filings. The ballroom he had rented for the meeting cost nearly $40,000. He had paid in cash. Why? What was he hiding? I added the receipt to my growing folder. Julia watched me one night, her eyes heavy with concern. "Isolde, you're building a wall of paper. But walls can fall. You need someone who can turn this into a weapon." She was right. I couldn't just collect evidence. I had to sharpen it. That night, I thought about Damien's new world. The high-rise penthouse. The expensive suits. The way he believed money erased morality. He thought the spotlight protected him. What he didn't know was that the brighter the light, the longer the shadows it casts. I closed my laptop and whispered to myself, "You built this empire with lies. I'll bring it down with the truth." The next morning, Julia handed me a business card. A lawyer's name gleamed in gold letters. "If you're serious about this," she said, "she's the one who can turn your fury into fire." Julia slid the card across the table like it was a key to a locked door. The name gleamed in gold letters. Evelyn Crane, attorney at law. I traced the embossed edges with my finger, my chest tightening. Evelyn Crane, her reputation carried whispers. Ruthless, precise, a lawyer who dismantled men who thought themselves invincible. "Call her," Julia said firmly. "You've collected enough to burn Damien's empire down, but evidence is just paper without strategy. Evelyn knows how to turn paper into fire." I hesitated. My hands ached from nights of sifting documents, my eyes burned from staring at screens, but part of me still resisted. "If I go to her, Julia, it becomes real. It won't just be me collecting files in your kitchen. It'll be war." Julia's gaze was steady. "It already is war. He declared it when he threw you out with nothing." Her words left no room for retreat. That night, with shaking fingers, I dialed Evelyn's number. Her assistant arranged an appointment the very next morning. Evelyn's office was nothing like Damien's gleaming skyscraper headquarters. Hers was modest, tucked on the 7th floor of a sandstone building that had seen decades of battles. The reception area smelled faintly of leather and ink, not power and ego. When I entered her office, Evelyn herself rose to greet me. She was in her 40s, tall, with sharp cheekbones and an expression that radiated both intelligence and restraint. She shook my hand firmly, studied me for a moment, then gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Julia told me a little," she said, her voice smooth, unhurried. "But I want to hear it from you. Tell me everything." And I did. For 2 hours I laid out my story. The champagne night, the public humiliation, the frozen locks, the settlement threat. Then I opened my binder and showed her the evidence. The contracts Damien had fudged, the bank statements bleeding with my money, the emails, the texts, the receipts. Each page landed like a stone between us. Evelyn did not interrupt. She listened with her head tilted, her pen sliding occasionally across her legal pad. When I finally stopped, the silence was heavy, the kind of silence that evaluates, dissects, decides. At last she folded her hands. "You've done remarkable work," she said. "Most women come to me with suspicions. You came with a case file." I exhaled, my body trembling. "So, is it enough?" Her eyes sharpened. "Enough to start. Damien's fortune rests on sand, as you said. You've given me cracks. With the right timing, the right pressure, we can widen them until the whole structure collapses." Something flickered inside me. Hope, yes, but sharper. Purpose. Julia leaned forward. "How do we do it?" Evelyn stood, pacing slowly. "We start with 2 fronts. First, civil claims. Restitution for the money siphoned from your account, damages for the fraud. Second, strategic leaks. Damien thrives on image. Strip that, and he loses more than dollars, he loses the currency of reputation. But the key," she tapped her pen against the desk, "is timing. We don't strike when he expects it. We strike when he's at his peak of arrogance. The higher he stands, the harder the fall." Her words sank deep. I remembered Damien's smirk, his toast to freedom, his casual dismissal of me as dead weight. He thought I was gone. Forgotten. Already erased. "He has a client meeting scheduled next week," I said. "He bragged about it. He said it would change everything again." Evelyn's lips curved slightly. "Perfect. That's when we move." For the first time since Damien had discarded me, I felt something like power stirring in my chest. Not anger, not grief, control. That night, Julia and I worked side by side at her dining table, refining timelines, labeling exhibits, cross-checking posts. She read through Dahlia's smug social media updates. Yes, Damien's sister was still by his side, flaunting gifts bought with money that had once been mine. Every post became another thread in the web we were spinning. As midnight approached, Julia looked up from her laptop. "You realize, don't you, that once this begins, you can't step back?" I nodded, my voice steady. "I don't want to step back. I want him to choke on the silence he forced me to carry." I closed the final folder, the papers crisp, the evidence airtight. I imagined Damien standing in his penthouse, sipping wine, convinced the world bent for him now. He had no idea that his downfall was already written in black ink and highlighted in yellow across Julia's table. And yet, as I drifted into uneasy sleep, a thought gnawed at me. Damien had built his empire on deception. What if his lies reached deeper than even I knew? Evelyn's office became our war room. The walls, once lined with neat shelves, now bore the weight of Damien's empire. Contracts pinned with colored tabs, photographs clipped with notes, spreadsheets spread across the desk like a battlefield map. I sat across from her, my hands folded tightly in my lap, while Julia leaned against the window sill, her eyes blazing with protective fire. Evelyn paced, every step deliberate, her heels clicking like a metronome of judgment. "Here is what we know," Evelyn began, her voice crisp. "Damien's wealth rests on inflated valuations and manipulated contracts. He has enemies, competitors, investors, regulators, who would seize the chance to tear him down. But they need proof. Proof we have." She turned to me. "The bank records, the emails, the statements, those are not just exhibits in court. They are leverage. He humiliated you publicly, Isolde. We will return the favor, but on a stage he cannot control." I clenched my hands tighter. "So what's the plan?" Evelyn's gaze sharpened. 3 steps. First, File a civil suit demanding restitution of your contributions to his company. Every dollar you invested, every bill you covered, every piece of your inheritance you sacrificed, we calculate it and demand it back with damages. Second, we prepare a dossier of his contract irregularities. We leak it discreetly to regulators and journalists. And third, she paused, letting the weight hang in the air. We time it all for his client meeting next week. He told the press it will secure his next fortune. Imagine the collapse when, instead, his name is synonymous with fraud. Julia smiled grimly. He'll walk in expecting applause and walk out to ashes. I exhaled slowly, my chest tightening with both fear and exhilaration. For weeks I had been drowning in humiliation. Now the water was receding, revealing the stones I could throw. Evelyn pulled out a ledger. We need precise numbers. How much of your own money went into Damien's ventures? I opened my binder and began listing it all. The check I wrote to cover rent in year 1. The inheritance I used to keep payroll alive. The medical bills I paid while Damien bragged about reinvesting every cent. Line by line, dollar by dollar, I tallied the quiet sacrifices I had once called love. By the time I finished, the number was staggering hundreds of thousands. Evelyn circled it in red. This will sting him more than the millions. He cannot deny this without denying the foundation of his empire. Julia placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You're not just getting justice. You're rewriting the story he tried to erase you from. That night, I returned to Julia's apartment and stared at the city skyline through her narrow window. Somewhere in that sprawl of glass and light, Damien was sipping wine, perhaps entertaining new women, convinced his 62 million bought him immortality. He didn't know the countdown had already begun. In the days that followed, I played my part carefully. I stayed silent publicly. No angry posts, no interviews, no confrontations. Silence was my camouflage. Meanwhile, Evelyn drafted the complaint. Julia gathered digital archives, and I combed through every forgotten file until our case gleamed like sharpened steel. But even as we built, doubts whispered. Damien was arrogant, but he was not stupid. He had lawyers, accountants, allies. He had Dahlia, his sister, who hovered at his side like a shadow. I knew she was not just decoration. She had access, she had knowledge, and she had her own ambition. One evening, Julia showed me a photo Dahlia had posted. She was draped in diamonds, captioned, "New life, new rules." I studied it closely and noticed the background, a luxury suite at the same hotel Damien had once dismissed as too expensive for us. A thought gnawed at me. Were they simply indulging in excess together? Or was there something more? I shook it off, forcing myself to focus. One war at a time. On the eve of the filing, Evelyn gathered us once more. Tomorrow the complaint is submitted. By the end of the week the leaks will spread. By the time Damien steps into his client meeting, he'll be standing on a trapdoor. I nodded, my voice low but firm. He humiliated me under chandeliers, Evelyn. I want him humiliated under floodlights. Her eyes glinted. Then prepare yourself. Because once this begins, there's no turning back. That night I lay awake, the city humming outside. In my mind I replayed Damien's toast, the laughter of his guests, the sting of being called dead weight. Soon the stage would reverse. He would be the spectacle, and I would be the silent architect behind it. But just before dawn, a message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. You think you're ready, Isolde? You have no idea how many secrets 62 million can hide. The morning of the filing felt colder than any winter. I stood in front of Evelyn's office building with the complaint folder pressed against my chest. Inside those pages was everything. My sacrifice tallied in red ink, Damien's manipulations recorded line by line, contracts, bank statements, emails. The legal strike that would break his glittering facade. Julia joined me, her jaw set, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck as if bracing for battle. Once this goes in, she said, the clock starts ticking. He won't see it coming. I nodded, but my stomach was tight with dread. Evelyn had warned me. The strongest plans often bend under the weight of the unexpected. Still, I had told myself Damien was arrogant enough not to notice the storm until it was too late. But arrogance does not mean blindness. Inside, Evelyn greeted us with her usual composure, her suit sharp, her eyes sharper. We filed today, she said. sliding the documents into a sealed envelope. By tomorrow, the media will smell blood. By the end of the week, Damien will be answering questions he never prepared for. Her confidence steadied me, until her assistant rushed in, pale and breathless. "Miss Crane," she whispered, "you need to see this." She handed Evelyn a tablet. Headlines blazed across the screen. Damien Reed to announce engagement at private gala tonight. $62 million man finds his muse. Photos of Damien filled the page, arm in arm with a young socialite I had never seen. Dazzling smiles plastered across both their faces. Beneath the headline, another sting. Sources confirm Damien Reed recently separated from former wife quietly. Insiders say the relationship was strained by her lack of belief in his vision. My hands trembled as I read. He hadn't just discarded me. He had rewritten the narrative. He wasn't the cruel husband who threw me out. He was the visionary reborn, shedding a bitter wife to embrace love and wealth. Julia hissed under her breath. "He's trying to bury you with spectacle." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "He knows something's coming. This is damage control preemptively disguised as triumph." I sank into the chair, bile rising in my throat. If he announces an engagement tonight, then tomorrow the story will be about love, not lawsuits. He'll paint me as jealous, spiteful. He'll discredit everything before we even start. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "Then we adjust. We don't wait for the end of the week. We time the filing for tonight. We let the gala be his stage, and your execution ground." The idea sent a chill down my spine. Damien had humiliated me under chandeliers once before. The thought of walking into his victory party, armed with truth, terrified me. But the fear carried fire. Julia placed her hand over mine. "Scar, he humiliated you in public. It's only fitting he falls the same way." I breathed deeply, forcing steel into my voice. "Then we strike tonight." The rest of the day was a blur of preparation. Evelyn called her contacts in the press, instructing them to hold back until the complaint was filed. Julia combed through the files one last time, ensuring no thread could be pulled loose. I rehearsed the silence I would wear like armor when Damien's eyes finally met mine again. But as dusk fell, unease gnawed at me. The anonymous messages hadn't stopped. Another one came through just before I slipped into my black dress for the gala. "He isn't just rich. He is dangerous. If you step into that room tonight, you may not walk out with only humiliation at stake." My hands froze on the clasp of my necklace. I read the words again and again. They weren't threats dripping with bravado. They were warnings, cold and deliberate. Julia knocked on the bedroom door. "Scarlett?" "No, Isolde." My sister's voice was steady. "It's time." I tucked the phone into my purse, the message burning in my mind. Was it a bluff? Or was there something buried in Damien's fortune that I hadn't yet uncovered? As the car pulled up to the glittering hotel where Damien's gala awaited, I told myself one truth. I had built a plan to expose a husband's betrayal. But tonight, I might be stepping into a battlefield far darker than I imagined. The hotel glowed like a jewel against the night sky. Limousines lined the entrance, flashes from cameras scattering across the marble steps as glittering guests swept inside. The gala was Damien's masterpiece, his stage to unveil not only his wealth, but his new life, his new woman, his rewritten story. I stepped out of the car with Julia on one side and Evelyn on the other. My dress was simple, black, understated. Not a single diamond. My silence was my statement. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and laughter. Tables overflowed with champagne. Waiters glided with trays of caviar. And a string quartet played in the corner. At the center of it all, Damien stood tall, his arm wrapped around the socialite from the headlines. She wore red silk, a glittering ring catching the light as she lifted her hand for every camera. The crowd parted as he stepped onto the stage. He raised his glass, his smile dazzling, practiced. "Friends," he began, his voice booming, "tonight is about transformation. I have been blessed with fortune, with love, with a future brighter than I ever dreamed. And I owe it not to the past, but to the courage of starting fresh." Polite applause rippled through the room. My hands clenched at my sides. Evelyn's phone buzzed in her hand. She leaned close to me. "It's filed," she whispered. Every reporter here will receive the complaint in 5 minutes. My pulse thundered. Damien went on, savoring his performance. When a man has vision, when he dares to shed what no longer serves him, the universe rewards him. Tonight, I stand before you free, ready, and unstoppable. The doors at the back opened. 2 reporters slipped in, phones buzzing. Then 3 more. Then 5. Screens lit up across the room. Heads bent, whispers spread like wildfire. I watched the ripple grow. The applause faltered. Glasses stilled midair. Damien frowned, sensing the shift. His new fiancée clutched his arm, her eyes darting nervously. Then a voice cut through the silence. Damien Reed, is it true you defrauded investors by falsifying valuations? Another. What about the civil complaint from your wife, demanding restitution for stolen funds? The air cracked open. Guests swiveled, eyes sharp, whispers turning to gasps. Damien blinked, stammering. This is nonsense. Baseless. Lies. But Evelyn had anticipated this moment. She slid a thin folder across to the nearest reporter. Inside, contracts, bank statements, emails. Proof. Hard, undeniable. Screens flashed. Cameras clicked. The ballroom was no longer his stage, it was his trial. Damien's smile collapsed. Sweat beaded his forehead as questions pummeled him. Did you use your wife's inheritance to cover payroll while claiming sole credit? Why do hotel records show overlapping stays with your sister? That last question landed like a thunderclap. The crowd gasped. His fiancée's hand slipped from his arm. The string quartet faltered, then stopped entirely. Marcus, no, Damien, stood frozen, his empire unraveling under the chandeliers he had chosen for his coronation. I stepped forward, not onto the stage, but just far enough that his eyes found mine across the room. I said nothing. I didn't need to. My presence was enough. The humiliation was public, undeniable, complete. His lips moved soundlessly. My name. A plea half-formed. Then the gavel of fate struck. Evelyn's voice rang out from the back. Clear, professional, devastating. Mr. Reed, my client will see you in court. The room erupted. Guests surged with whispers, reporters swarmed, flashes blinded. Damien stumbled back, cornered, his carefully crafted world collapsing in real time. And I stood still, silent, the architect of his ruin. Yet as the chaos swirled, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. One line. You wanted him broken. But you don't know the secret that will break you. The ballroom fractured like glass. One moment, Damien stood tall beneath the chandeliers, basking in applause. The next, the room had turned on him. Reporters swarming, guests whispering, screens flashing with the complaint Evelyn had unleashed. It was no longer his coronation. It was a public dissection. Damien. Comment on the falsified contracts. Mr. Reed, how much of your wife's money funded your success? Are the hotel records with your sister authentic? The questions hit like arrows, one after another. Damien tried to smile, but it was a grotesque parody now. His fiancée stepped back, her red dress shimmering under the flashes, her hand trembling as she pulled away from his arm. I stood at the edge of the chaos, watching. My heart thundered, but my face remained still. 4 years I had been the silent shadow at his side. Tonight my silence was power. Dahlia appeared near the stage, pushing through the crowd. Her face was pale, her voice sharp. Enough. This is slander, lies, all of it. She tried to shield Damien, but the questions only doubled. Miss Reed, did you benefit from your brother's fraud? Can you explain your shared hotel stays? Her mouth opened, but no words came. The crowd saw what I had lived for years, her entitlement, her arrogance, cracking under the weight of exposure. Damien turned toward me then. His eyes, once filled with smug certainty, now blazed with desperation. He mouthed my name again. Isolde. As if I could save him. As if the woman he had called dead weight could now become his lifeline. I did not move. Reporters shoved microphones closer, their voices overlapping, hungry. Damien's new fiancée slipped away quietly, her public smile erased, her phone already pressed to her ear. She wouldn't tie her future to a man sinking so fast. The guests, once his allies, distanced themselves. I watched men who had toasted him hours before quietly slip toward the exits, unwilling to be tainted by his collapse. Women who had admired his wealth now whispered behind manicured hands, their gazes sharp with judgment. And above it all, the cameras captured every second. By morning, this footage would not just be news. It would be legend. Evelyn guided me toward the exit, her voice low but firm. You don't need to linger. The trap is sprung. Let him drown in it. But I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay, to watch every shred of his empire burn under those lights. Yet Julia touched my arm. He's already ruined. Don't give him the satisfaction of thinking you need to see him fall. Leave him in the wreckage he made. We stepped into the night air. Outside the hotel, the chaos had spilled onto the street. Reporters turned their lenses toward me now. Mrs. Reed, do you have a statement? Isolde, did you plan this for revenge? What do you say to accusations that you're bitter, jealous, vindictive? I stopped on the steps, their flashes searing my vision. For a moment I considered answering. But then I remembered Evelyn's words. Silence can be louder than answers. I lifted my chin, looked straight ahead, and walked to the waiting car without a word. Inside, the noise muffled. I exhaled, my body shaking from the adrenaline. Julia squeezed my hand. You did it. He'll never recover. But as the car pulled away, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. You've humiliated him. Well done. But what happens when the truth comes out about you? My breath caught. My hands went cold. Julia noticed my expression. What is it? I locked the screen, my heart pounding. Nothing, I lied. But the words on that phone burned into me. Because tonight Damien had fallen. But someone else was pulling strings in the shadows, and their target was me. The morning after the gala, I woke to a storm of noise. Not in the street outside Julia's apartment, but on every screen, every station, every headline. Damien's face glared from the television, not framed in triumph, but in humiliation. His jaw clenched, his eyes wide, sweat darkening his collar as cameras captured the exact moment his empire began to crumble. Read fortune in question as fraud allegations surface. $62 million man or master manipulator. From visionary to villain. Damien Reed exposed at gala. The anchors dissected the story with relish. Clips played on loop. Damien stammering, Dahlia pale and silent, his fiancée slipping away from his side. One commentator shook her head and said, he built a castle on sand, and last night the tide came in. I sat on the couch, coffee cooling in my hands, as Julia scrolled through her phone. Scar look. Social media is tearing him apart. I leaned over. Hashtags trended across the feed. Hashtag Reed exposed, hashtag Galagate, hashtag Isolde speaks. Memes of Damien's collapsed smile flooded the internet, side by side with screenshots of the complaint Evelyn had filed. My name was everywhere now, not as the discarded wife, but as the woman who refused to stay silent. But the attention was not all praise. Some called me brave. Others called me vindictive. Strangers debated my life as if it were theirs to dissect. She's bitter, she's jealous, she's trying to cash in. The words stung, but I forced myself to remember. Silence was still my shield. I didn't need to fight in comment sections. I had already fought where it mattered. Meanwhile, Damien's fall was accelerating. By noon, news broke that his client meeting had been cancelled. The company he had boasted about courting released a statement. We do not engage with partners under legal and ethical review. His investors were pulling out, one by one like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Financial analysts speculated on air. If the fraud claims are substantiated, Reed could face not just civil damages, but regulatory action. His fortune may not survive the month. Julia switched off the television. He's finished, she said firmly. He destroyed himself the moment he underestimated you. I nodded, but unease lingered. Because while the world celebrated his downfall, my phone buzzed again. Another private number. Another message. Enjoy the spotlight, Isolde. You think Damien was the only one with secrets? Look deeper. 62 million doesn't come clean. My blood ran cold. This wasn't Damien. This wasn't Dahlia. This was someone else, someone who knew the underbelly of his deals. Someone who wanted me afraid. I didn't tell Julia right away. I simply slipped the phone into my pocket and forced a smile. But the words dug into me sharp as glass. That afternoon, Evelyn called. We've stirred the nest. Regulators have reached out. They want your full cooperation. Damien will be scrambling now, but be ready, cornered men lash out. Her warning only deepened the chill in my bones. Because Damien wasn't the only shadow in this story anymore. If others were involved, investors, partners, people who had fed his fraud, then exposing him might have lit fires in places I hadn't even considered. That evening, as the city lights blinked on, Julia and I sat together in her small kitchen. It's strange, I admitted quietly. I thought I'd feel victorious. And I do a little. But more than that, I feel watched. Like someone is waiting for me to make a wrong move. Julia frowned. Whoever is sending those messages, ignore them. They're trying to scare you. But I couldn't. Because each one felt too precise, too informed, as if they weren't taunts but warnings. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Damien's broken face replaying in my mind. He had begged me with his eyes across the ballroom, but it wasn't his desperation that haunted me. It was the certainty in those anonymous texts. Damien's empire was collapsing in public, but in the silence of the night, I knew something else. The game wasn't over. I had torn down my husband. Now the shadows behind him were coming for me. In the weeks that followed, Damien's world collapsed piece by piece. His name, once spoken with admiration in business circles, became a curse. Investors abandoned him. Regulators circled. Former allies leaked their own stories to the press, each one painting him not as a visionary but as a fraud who had spun lies until they broke. I watched from a distance as his fortune, $62 million that had once glittered like a crown, turned into an anchor pulling him under. His penthouse was photographed empty. His new fiancée was seen on the arm of someone else. His sister disappeared from the public eye entirely. And then one evening, I heard the knock at Julia's door. I knew before I opened it who it would be. Damien stood there, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow, the arrogant sheen stripped away. For the first time in years he looked small. "Isolde," he whispered. "Please, just talk to me. I made a mistake. I need you." I stared at him in silence. This was the same man who had called me dead weight, who had toasted to my erasure. Now he was begging for scraps of the dignity he had thrown away. I didn't shout. I didn't weep. I simply closed the door. Because revenge is not always fire and fury. Sometimes it is the quiet strength of knowing you no longer owe your betrayer anything. Not explanation, not forgiveness, not a second chance. The headlines moved on eventually. Another scandal took center stage. Another name fell from grace. But I didn't fade back into silence. I built a new life, one not tied to his shadow. I returned to work, I signed contracts in my own name. I stood straighter in rooms where once I would have hidden behind him. And though the anonymous messages haunted me, those warnings that Damien's secret stretched deeper, I realized something. I was no longer afraid. If more shadows came, I was ready. Because I had already faced the worst kind of betrayal. I had survived it and I had turned it into power. Sometimes when I walk past the hotel where Damien's empire cracked open under the chandeliers, I pause. I remember the way his eyes searched for me as the truth swallowed him whole. And I remind myself, humiliation is temporary. Dignity rebuilt is permanent. To anyone listening, to anyone who has been dismissed, silenced, erased, I want you to hear this. You are not powerless. Even when they strip you of home, of money, of pride, you can rebuild. Your silence can become strategy. Your pain can become evidence. And your patience can become the weapon that topples giants. Damien thought $62 million made him untouchable. But in the end, it couldn't buy him respect. Couldn't buy him love. And it couldn't shield him from the truth. My name is Isolde. I was the wife he underestimated, the woman he discarded like nothing. But when he came back begging, I reminded him of the lesson he will never forget. When you gamble with someone's loyalty, when you trade love for arrogance, you don't just lose your fortune. You lose the one thing money can never buy back. Me. If my story resonates with you, share it. Let others know that betrayal is not the end. It can be the beginning of your power. Remember, the sharpest revenge is not violent or reckless. It is lawful, undeniable, and unforgettable.